Hello and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. My name is Serge. Joining me today, I've got a Nelly.
Hey, I'm here.
And a Wheeler.
I'm also here.
Shout out to James on Tech. Reminder that everything we do is brought to you by you with your support of the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Welcome to part 2 of our Murders at Karlov Manor set review. A reminder that our set reviews are not exhaustive. We don't talk about every card, just the cards that we think are interesting, going to make a splash in the format, or that we think you'll ask us a lot about, just to sort of get ahead of the comments. Also, we're talking about the Commander product, of which we included an card, 2 cards, as well as the supplementary Clue product. I'm not quite sure what that is.
Clue and or Cluedo. They're just new cards that are kind of being released with this set, tied into this set in a board game.
We'll make sure to point out which of those cards they are once we get to them. Today we're covering green, gold, artifact, and lands. And let's jump right into it with Wheeler.
Analyze the Pollen. Single green for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may collect evidence 8. So reminder, collecting evidence means you exile cards with total mana value N or greater from your graveyard. Search your library for a basic land card. If evidence was collected, instead search your library for a creature or land card, reveal that card, and put it into your hand. So this is a card that is going to be overrated by its in terms of flexibility or ubiquity, right? People see 1 mana, find a creature or land, and they think that's great. Much like players do with Traverse the Ovenwald when they say, well, I got Sylvan Library and Courser of Crufix, I'm going to hit Delirium, no problem. Then they don't. That said, I think this card is ultimately different from Traverse the Ovenwald, but better. Collect Evidence 8 is a big ask to hit. When you think about how many lands and 1 mana cards you delve away for Treasure Cruise and stuff, this is a larger ask. But the decks that want this kind of effect and can take advantage of this effect get a lot from Find a Basic just as a floor, because they're typically decks that lose to Blood Moon real bad because they are either lands or they're dredge. Or they are decks that tend to play just a higher density of 3 drops and even like 4 drops because they are part of lands value engines, or they're dredge and your dredger is like a 6 mana card with no text on it that dumps more 4 mana, 5 mana cards into your graveyard. And so if I'm playing like a more combo-oriented version of lands or dredge, or I'm going to be playing this in Belcher just because it finds a basic and then also finds Auriok Salvagers pretty easily. This card's all right. Yeah, I like it there. But this isn't I don't think this is a slide it into my Jund deck or my lands mid-range deck. I think you got to commit.
After trying some like black-green mid-range or Abzan mid-range with Traverse the Ovenwald, I've started to take the same kind of like reserved stance, and also we've got to play the PPR since recording the last episode, and like Collect Evidence 8's a lot.
Yeah, and that is obviously limited is different from constructed, but that is in a place where players are playing face down 6 drops that end up in the graveyard and trade. Yeah. And like we have Solitude and Fury and like pitch spells that can really get this going. But when this isn't doing anything, it does kind of just replace itself. But time has shown that is not enough of a justifier for similar-ish cards to this.
All right, let's move on.
Archdruid's Charm. Sorry, excuse me. Clean take. It's Archdruid.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a charm, and it costs 3 green pips. It's an instant. It's a bit like Archmage's Charm. For some reason, I can say that, but instead of a mage, it's for a druid. Mm-hmm. You have to choose one. Search your library for a creature or land card and reveal it. Put it onto the battlefield tapped if it's a land card. Otherwise, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Or put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Or exile target artifact or enchantment. So what have we got here? It's a cool new modal charm spell in mono green. It costs 3 green pips, so just as difficult and kind of, exclusive of multicolor decks or high bar to jump to be able to cast as its fellow Archmage's Charm from Modern Horizons. And honestly, kind of similar power level. You can 1-for-1 with artifacts and enchantments, but it exiles them. You can 1-for-1 with creatures, as long as you've got one that's at least as big as the other creature, or one smaller. Or you can tutor up any creature or land. So you've got like your Expedition map and your Eladamri's Call in one card that also just kind of kills anything on the board that's not a planeswalker or a land. Although if you really need to kill a land, you can just go find your wasteland with this. So it's a real jack of all trades. Unfortunately, it's also a master of all those trades. So you're just going to see this card a lot on the stack, and in deck lists, and in the graveyard, and in your opponent's hand. You're going to Thoughtseize this away. I think this is probably going to become a staple of the decks that are comfortable casting it, which are pretty few. But, Hoof players going to be picking up their copies of this. Mono green Stompy, obviously. Anything that's base green and has a little splash and likes tutoring up creatures.
I think even more flexible than that, because so many of the green decks that are playing elves can actually hit triple green pretty reliably.
Sure. Yeah. Any deck where you think you can cast it, I think you should put it in.
Most green X, like even 3-color green decks with creatures tend to have green as the anchor for the colors, and like have access to Yavimaya and just fixing. So if you're like, even Sandy B could play this kind of card. I think it's not that far-fetched. It's wild that this isn't a charm. And it's not even a command. It's a 5-modal. Like, there are 5 modes to this card.
Yeah.
That's on a 3-mana spell.
It's like a Garruk Relentless of charms or something, where they're just like, wait, no, there's more on the back. Right? Keep reading. It does more stuff. Yeah, fantastic card. And unlike Llanowar Tribe, your deck could be on 3 green pips on turn 6, and you have a mountain in play, but you can cast this, and it's still fantastic.
Yeah. Cool. Next up, we have the Case of the Locked Hot House. This is a 4-mana case for 3 and a green. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. To solve, control 7 or more lands. Solved. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play lands and cast creatures and enchantments from the top of your library. This is a lands card. Now, this is a little bit more of an all-in lands deck than, say, the lands package that you would add with the casual inclusion of, let's say, a Ramanop Excavator or something like that. It's 4 mana and it doesn't attack. That being said, as a dedicated lands deck, there's fair magic, and then there's when you start to get a little bit out of control. And this looks like one of those cards that is going to absolutely break the game wide open. One of the issues with the lands deck is you can end up with an imbalance between lands and lands payoffs, and the ability to play off the top of your deck with cards like Courser of Crewfix, Oracle of Moldoya, even library manipulation like Sylvan Library becomes so powerful, and that solved ability to let you play lands off the top, and furthermore creatures and enchantments, is very exciting. So yeah, look out for this with your local lands player. I don't think this is a mid-range card though. I think this is the sort of thing that if you're going hard, like a Serge lands list, not a Wheeler lands list.
Yeah, I'd say that this is the premier all-in lands pilot of the format kind of lands card. Jacob Varro, of course. Top 8 competitor for 2023. Yeah.
That's just because I wasn't competing.
If you're a half lands, half enchantment combo deck, which honestly, sure, we think of Jacob first, but those lists are kind of starting to crop up. More and more people are trying it.
Yeah, people realize that there's just so much overlap between these cards.
Yep.
Like, you could even theoretically play this in Enchantress as a way to just literally cast everything off the top of your deck.
Well, an amazing thing about lands is Enchantress is they love 1-mana enchantments, which is Fastbond, which is Exploration, which is a lot of these. That overlap is not there. And as the premier lands Enchantress pilot of the format, I have I have played a lot of decks that have blurred that line back and forth.
I don't know if that's
don't-
entirely true.
Is Jacob on the podcast with us? I'd show
Hey,
up for that shift.
That would be.
I've tapped a Sarah Sanctum
Jacob
once
even
or
lives
twice.
in
Jacob,
Victoria.
he lives in, and he's very well spoken. I mean, he's that guy
Great guy.
can. Yeah, he's a teacher. Still, he can talk.
Oh, it's too busy. That's fine. We'll just move on.
Never seen him tilt.
yeah. I mean, I have.
Wheeler, you're up.
We get paired round one a lot.
right.
Anyways, on the trail, this is a card from the Commander.
Not yet.
No, I skipped a card. Sorry, I had lands on the mind. A hard-hitting question. 1 green sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. So this is the best fight or punch spell, I guess, of all time, as far as just like flexibility, cost. Nice planeswalker. It'd be a shame if I punched it right in the jaw, and that obviously it doesn't fight back. This is very cheap. It's very effective. I'd consider playing this even outside of mono green Stompy, just because it can kill planeswalkers, and it's nice to have another 1-mana spell that, you know, in something like Gruul Monsters or like Selesnya, like Green-White Little Kid, having what is effectively a flame slash that hits planeswalkers is pretty exciting. Yeah. It's just good, clean Magic the Gathering with this card.
Well, there are some colors that struggle with planeswalkers more than others. As you mentioned, red can burn. Black has a lot of orb planeswalkers that's been slapped onto their removal spells. So blue, if it gets through your counter magic, can be a little bit weak there. So like a green-blue deck, or white if you're not playing Oblivion Rings, like it does give a little bit of parity to green. I mean,
Yeah.
green has the creature advantage, but you know.
If blue-green Sorensen wasn't completely unplayable, I'd consider playing this card as well. But typically those decks have gone into red or black for ways to deal with planeswalkers and other threats.
What's interesting to me about this card is that it's clearly like the best prey upon we've ever seen, right? Not only does your creature not take damage, but it can also hit a planeswalker. And it's still, even with like, you know, it obviously being the like new pushed best version of that effect, it's not going to make the cut in a lot of lists just because of the way this card works. And that's, I don't know, that's just interesting to me.
Removal not working is the worst thing in the world.
The worst
like it is
feel,
just
right?
you're so
You got to
far
go
behind.
for the throat and hand. You're staring at this worm coil engine that's killing you. You're like, I wish.
Name a more iconic duo.
Yeah, I actually wish my hand was empty.
Yeah.
But let's move on.
Okay.
Melly.
All right. Now I'll talk about On the Trail as someone who doesn't lie about being the best lands player in the format. This is a 1 and a green enchantment that says whenever you draw your second card each turn, you may put a land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. Okay, so kind of cool exploration variant, right? It's more mana than exploration, but it's another one of these effects. I don't immediately have a place for this card outside of standard. Like, I don't know that it's going to go... I'm not a big lands pilot, so I don't know if this is worth... Like, if you're just like, okay, we're jamming as many explorations into the deck as we can, and this is an exploration, so we're jamming it.
I mean, if you're playing this in standard, the judge might have some
This
questions.
is from the commander set.
Hey,
yeah.
this is a commander card. Put it in your commander decks. Don't put it in your standard decks.
Yeah, this is an
Kids.
interesting.
You heard it here first from Nelson, the person who declared that it was a commander card.
I'm gonna be with Nelly on here. I'm a little bit lower on this card as well because it looks more like a burgeoning than it does an exploration, and as such, you don't always have control over. I mean, obviously, as a second draw, it just doesn't work when you always want it to. A neat thing is you can brainstorm on your opponent's turn. And that
Right.
does count as 2 draws, so you can set it up to work multiple times. But typically, when you're the lands deck, you want to be able to control very reliably when you're hitting those second land drops, so you can say Wasteland Fetch or something, right? And I don't know if I love it. Also, it's specifically a land card from your hand, not play an additional land, which exploration does. So it doesn't synergize with your crucibles or your excavators. Sorry, like forgot the word for a second. But I don't know, Wheeler, are you high on this card?
No, I'm not super high on it. It is just another cheap enchantment that cares about lands that also triggers off of drawing additional cards, which is kind of interesting. It is a card that says a bunch of words on it that seem appealing, and like maybe it shows up in the Enchantress list because you just get to cut a 3-mana enchantment for another 2-mana enchantment to really get that engine humming. But yeah, really hate this trend of putting these lands into play tapped. I mean, like playing additional lands into play tapped. We were spoiled by Uro and Growth Spiral, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, the tough part about this card is like it kind of needs to be next to some sort of weird like Howling Minds that happen on each player's upkeep or something. Like if your Turboland deck is making everybody draw every single turn, suddenly this has some value because it's going to give you an extra land drop on your opponent's turn.
Mm-hmm.
And then in every other respect, I see it as a much worse burgeoning, which is still a card that doesn't always make the cut.
Yeah.
Or not burgeoning, sorry.
Exploration.
Well, it is a much worse burgeoning.
It's a worse
Right.
burgeoning.
It's worse burgeoning too.
Yeah.
I do like it exactly where Wheeler mentioned, which is if your Enchantress deck is looking a little bit bloated, this could play a role because you will be consistently double drawing each turn and then maybe not having ways to play lands, but that's about it. All right, well, let's move on. Next up, we have the Sharp-Eyed Rookie. This is a 2-mana 2/2 human detective for 1 and a green. It has vigilance, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if its power is greater or its toughness is greater, I'm trying to skip a bunch of stuff, put a +1/+1 counter on the rookie and investigate. So this is a 2-mana evolving one. Was that the name of the classic 1-mana 0/1?
Yeah, this has evolved, except you also investigate.
Yeah,
right?
and it is kind of cool. Basically, for that reason, there is a deck that cares about +1/+1 counters in the format. There's a lot of grow decks. Synergizes well for that. It also makes a lot of artifacts, and as we've talked about on the podcast increasingly recently, artifacts are cool and good and powerful, and just getting that for free is wild, and finding a home for this that synergizes is also pretty strong. I think this card is probably good enough to be seen in some mid-range decks, just because the clues are going to do a lot of work, especially if you're an elf deck and you've got an excess of mana. That'll be fine, but I think where this card is really going to shine is where you're going to synergize with those +1/+1s, those clue tokens, and or both.
I think I disagree with that final statement.
Ooh, what do you like?
I think that this card actively gets worse, or not even actively gets worse, but I don't think that this is the kind of card where if you're looking to take advantage of generating additional game pieces, you're probably not getting this leveled up that quickly, which is fine. Honestly, this just needs to go up once and then it replaces itself, right? But then there's still cost of inclusion.
Sure, of course.
Which can push this card out of the way. And then the counters, it only ever gets the counters when, or you only ever investigate creature. When, like, as a part of one whole block of a text here. And so for the counters decks, the creatures tend to, like, start pretty small, and then you get the counters through your Luminarch Aspirants, your Siege Veterans.
So this isn't actually going to grow that much in the grow deck. Ironically,
I mean, it can, like, if you get you could have play patterns of play this card, play, another thing that grows, and then here's a Verdurous Gear Hulk that buffs everything. But I don't think it does it with enough frequency that you're going to want to play this over either another synergy piece or even just like a really good green X card that is just beats this out on power level. I do like it for mono green though. Like you said, if you have a bunch of mana, just cashing in those clues and like curving out is kind of nice. It's nice to have a 2-drop if they kill your elf that naturally gets bigger and plays into you having a 3-drop. But yeah, I don't think you should overthink this card.
That's
fair. I guess what I'm saying.
I hadn't thought of it for counters. I like the idea of mono green Stompy. I could see it having a home in Black Mold.
Yeah.
Just because it's the kind of card that they like in Black Mold, right? Like you have pretty aggressive stats, like they're fine stats, 2/2 vigilance for 2 at the very baseline. It's acceptable, and then it threatens to be a 3/3 pretty quickly, and then it replaces itself. But you have to put in that extra 2 mana on a later turn, and that's the kind of cost of inclusion that Black Mold I think can handle, right? It's like early turns get some pieces down that matter. Later turns we can kind of put installments away on mana. We don't mind that.
Yeah, Black Mold or like Selesnya, like decks that have decks that also just play 2 mana 3-power creatures
Yeah.
with regularity.
Yeah.
Maybe even Gruul. I don't know. This card's tough. If this card was printed 3 years ago, we'd be very
Yeah,
excited.
yeah.
This is definitely a card where I could see us either, getting beaten by it for years to come, or never talking about it again.
Yeah.
Like it's right there where you're just like, this card is fair, but maybe it's actually really good.
I won't be upset that I bought a copy, but also I might think like, hey, this could have been a coffee. This could have been
Been a coffee.
Right. Incredible.
All right, let's talk about our last green card, Wheeler.
Undergrowth Recon.
I definitely thought that said raccoon.
Well,
That's what it's called now.
yeah, Undergrowth Raccoon.
Sorry to cut you off.
1 green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target land card from your graveyard to play tapped. So it's kind of, we've talked about the like big degenerate lands decks a couple of times so far. And I actually think that that's an archetype that is underexplored right now. Pun not intended. But like exploration itself, maybe it's all the vintage cube I've been playing, but exploration itself is just like kind of an unreal Magic card, right? Like especially once you get the coursers and the crucibles and whatnot. And so building a lands deck that isn't just like, oh, I wish I were playing the initiative, is kind of an appealing avenue to take. This card, I was so high on it until I read Upkeep, and I was like, oh, I thought it was end step. I got to get a full turn cycle, and then it comes into play tapped, which is not the end of the world, but it is the end of, well, I get to threaten Merit Lodge next turn, or I get to strip lock you immediately. And I just think it's a bit too much to play. You can't even, like, the tapped part of it means that it's not really providing acceleration without throwing in a Tireless Provisioner. You're not able to get like weird Mystic Sanctuary loops going on.
Yep.
It just, it's close, but it's just too...
Well, you don't even get to do fun stuff like end step, cycle a Triome, and then have that as mana, right?
Yeah.
Like that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunately a trend with mythic rares in this set where you're like, oh, it's the worst of both worlds for some reason. Yeah.
So do you see this card as like a yes, try it out if you're dedicated lands, or just like no approval? Because it is, I agree with you, it's 2 whole turns before you get that land.
Mm-hmm.
I would
Untapped,
play
right?
the 6 mana Crucible creature over this.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
I don't own a copy of the 6 mana Crucible creature.
Yeah.
I can't even name it.
Is that the one with prototype green or unearth or whatever? Okay,
no,
that's
you're thinking of
I'm thinking of the Brothers War one.
Ancient Green Warden, and
Oh,
you're
okay.
thinking of Perennial Behemoth.
Perennial Behemoth.
And I'm usually thinking of Perennial Behemoth. Love that
Perennial
card.
Behemoth is a good one.
Yeah, it's what I don't want to say. Don't try out a card like this,
of course.
especially off the back of there's not enough people experimenting in this art.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
why I asked. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, I want to circle back to the same sort of thing I said about, I think it was on the trail, which is as a lands deck, particularly if you're trying to go all in combo, you really want to be able to choose when you play your lands. Think of it like a storm deck. You don't want to, you want your pieces to be able to react when you put your foot down on the accelerator. And this doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
This doesn't go infinite with fast bond. This doesn't let you double land on key turns when you want to. You can't, like, if you try and strip mine lock somebody out with this, imagine strip mine, wait an entire turn, comes into play tapped, wait another turn, then strip mine again. It just doesn't, in 2024, it doesn't keep pace with your opponent killing you with Questing Beast.
I think it's pretty emblematic of what that archetype is trying to do and the cost it's willing to pay, that the first 3 green cards we talked about could all fit into this archetype, yet they all have a larger upfront cost, right? 4 mana enchantment, 3 green pips, exile 8 cards, but they do what you want to do. Like they fill that role. And sometimes Canlander players get distracted on, they get distracted by like cheap cost or flexibility when like just pay the man and we'll get through the door. Right? Yeah.
Yes, we didn't know there was going to be a code check that's mandatory.
Yeah.
But My Chemical Romance is playing. Let's go.
But it's $5 to not harsh the vibe of our night. Just pay it.
Yeah,
like, come on.
All right, let's start with gold. Nelly.
I want to talk about Alquist Prof or Alquist. I don't know. Yeah, Al. Good old Al.
Good old Al.
1 white blue for a 3/3 legendary human detective with vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, investigate. I'm already kind of in. Like the centaur courser that makes a treasure and has vigilance is like, I've played worse cards, but you can pay X white blue, tap him and sacrifice a clue. You draw X cards and gain X life. So
Sphinx's Revelation.
yeah, Sphinx's
mana.
Revelation is a card that people like playing in Canadian Highlander, even though it's really expensive.
Yeah, it's not good, but
They love it. Yeah, we
That's
love it.
boomer magic right there.
We can't help it. We love it. So I don't know. In truth, I'm not sure if this card has a home in Canadian Highlander. I do like it. It's got a lot going right for it. I just think that the reality of like being a creature with vigilance, and part of the value of your card is that you're supposed to attack, and for 3 mana in Canadian Highlander, there's often much scarier things happening than just 3/3s. So I don't have a home for this card immediately. I do like it though. I think it's got a lot of potential. Maybe like the old school blue-white control decks will rear their head again at some point, and this will be kind of like a cool mid-range tool for them. But it doesn't have flying, so I don't know. I please open the floor if anyone has any other thoughts or a place where they could find Mr. Proft.
This is a card that falls into the category of it's a mythic rare from after 2022. So if you run into it or play it yourself, it's likely not embarrassing.
Yeah,
right?
It's definitely not embarrassing.
It's not optimal, but it's not, you're not going to be like, oh, you mean my Nimble Mongoose is only a 1/1? Dang, right? It's like a 3-mana 3/3 with an ETB that replaces itself, a keyword that is relevant to combat, and then I drew this on turn 9, and my opponent did not draw their lightning bolt. And that can cause you to win the game.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, where do you play this? That's the big thing. I mean, probably the command zone is unfortunately the answer.
We need maybe like a name for cards where it's like, if this shows up on the battlefield, like, okay, go for it. The problem is that like it's hard to, in your right mind, put it into your deck before you head to the tournament.
Yeah.
Like if you accidentally end up running this because like you lost or your friend stole your other card and you're like minutes before the tournament, I need a card, right? Yeah, then like this guy's going to do fine for it. Like it's a great rare binder control card.
Mm-hmm. Or if you're recording a North 100 showdown and really need to push the idea that you're playing a clues deck.
Winky face.
Spoilers. Anyways, probably don't play this.
Yeah.
Next up, we have, this is from the Clue Extra product. I don't know what to call it. Yeah. Introducing the Carnage Interpreter. This is a 3-mana 3/3 Devil Detective for 1 and a Rakdos hybrid. When it enters the battlefield, discard your hand, then investigate 4 times.
How many times?
4 times.
4 times. As long as you have 1 or fewer cards in hand, it gets +2/+2 and has menace.
Black artifacts go burr.
It's a 3.
How you doing over there?
This is just very funny.
It's just mean that this came right after Alquist Proft.
Yeah, this is a 3-mana 5/5. It gives you a bunch of clues, which is kind of tricky. But that being said, this is the color of just like doing weird stuff as it is anyways. Like Rakdos, particularly all in demons and devils. Like the color of 4-mana 6/6s that you clock your opponent, but you're doing irreversible damage to yourself and your board state.
Is this a red deck wins card?
This isn't necessarily a Rakdos card. This
you like this as mono red?
Well, the hybrid symbols are important. Yeah.
My first thought on this is mono black, and this does a great job of, specifically in Rakdos, of refilling your hand. Of if you're going really quickly and you're already down to 1 or 2 cards, you refill it. It is mana intensive. I mean, to get those 4 clues is going to cost you 8 mana, which is not cheap, but you can kind of spread it out over a couple of turns.
Rakdos finally, like I know I just said before this, this isn't a Rakdos card, and now I'm going to talk about it as a Rakdos card.
Sure.
But
then you can shift to mono red after.
Yeah, as a Rakdos card, Rakdos itself actually has like an identity now in our format that isn't just bad mono black, which is putting a hat on a hat, or bad mono red, right? Like people were like, Goblin Guide and Thoughtseize, and it's like, that's not how Magic the Gathering should be played. But now you have like Blood Tithe Harvester, Inti, Lelia, Smuggler's Copter. Some of these cards are older, but you got new context to play them alongside like Dragon's Rage Channeler and Dreadhorde Arcanist and Ragavan. Just like the card quality in Black-Red is so high, and you rip through your deck. And like, you might not have a lot of cards in hand at the start of your turn, but you will have a selection of like 4 different cards to play over the course of your turn.
Sure. Attack, exile 2 cards.
Yeah. It's just like attack, draw a land. Well, I'm going to crew my Smuggler's Copter and attack, loot this land. Inti's going to trigger exiling a card. Then I'm going to maybe discard another card to this Inti, exile another card. And maybe I have like a blood token or a clue off of this, or exile. These cards I've exiled I can play them because they're all cheap interaction, like lightning bolts and fatal pushes and whatnot. So it has this identity of a deck with not card advantage, but like card flow and like card velocity of just like you're constantly churning through things.
Love the word velocity there, yeah.
And then this thing's just a 3-mana 5/5 menace.
Yep.
Like,
oh, right, it gets menace.
Yeah.
Menace.
And it's 1 or fewer.
Yeah.
You get your draw step. It's like, yeah, okay, cool. Yeah. And like, if you play this as mono red, where your card quality is much higher than something like mono black, you're still a deck. That wasn't
It's okay,
even,
Nelly. It's okay.
It's
that wasn't
fine.
a jab.
I'm right
That
here.
wasn't a jab.
It's okay. It's true.
That wasn't
It's
a jab.
okay. We're good.
But
if you play it in mono red,
well, if you play it in mono red, your cards are like, you only have like 3 to 4 3-drops. And then everything else costs 0 to 2 mana. And so, yeah, just like having this card discard your hand of like 1 or 2 cards, which is not that different from some of the cards that have seen play in red, like Flame of Keld, or I guess Bomat Courier in a way. That's cheating, but and then just being able to crack a clue and then immediately use your the rest of your mana to cast whatever you drew, or just crack another clue on their turn, untap, and then dump your hand when you have the mana.
All right, shall we move on?
Yeah, this card's scary. Get off the screen.
I like it. Yeah, I like it.
I'm worried.
You're up, Wheeler.
Drag the Canal. Blue and a black for an instant that says create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. If a creature died this turn, you gain 2 life, surveil 2, and investigate. This card's really appealing because for 1 card, you could make a creature, draw a card at a later date, sculpt the top of your deck, and gain some life. But like the play patterns with this card, I'm not super sold on. This is the kind of card where you would hope that you could make a 2/2, chump block, and then get all this, which maybe that's asking for too much. But, we've been blessed with other cards in these colors that do similar-ish things. So like, what is, how do we do this? How are we getting the most out of this? Like, kill their thing at combat and then blow them out and get all this? Like, that is a reasonable-ish scenario. But also, I don't know, that feels like the kind of like stories people tell you between rounds, and less like what actually happens.
I think you need to evaluate this as just an instant speed 2/2 most of the time and be okay with that.
Which is not the end of the world if it's attached to an instant or sorcery. It means you could Snapcaster this back. Like the fact that this card, you play your Snapcaster, give this flashback, block with your Snapcaster, it dies,
then you
flash
cast it
back.
after. I mean, that's probably the best case scenario, specifically off of a Snapcaster, right?
Yeah, so if you're like playing some kind of blue-black deck that has cheap evasive creatures and a bunch of spells, like a tempo to kind of deck, or something with Fairy Mastermind and like Malcolm and friends, then this is not an embarrassing card to play. But I'm not as sold on this card when the floor is a flash bear. Like, the floor is Ashcoat.
You got an Ambush Viper.
That's right.
Yeah.
Better Snapcaster Mage itself. I could see, say you're in Grixis 2-for-1s, you've got a lot of 1-mana removal, so you have to slap 1 more onto the cost of this and another card that's killing one of their things, and then you get the full boat on 3. So that situation, I think, in Grixis 2-for-1 is going to happen a fair bit. If you're in Sultai or Esper, maybe there's still an argument for this card, maybe, because you like having cards that can replace themselves and act as, the Wall of Omens job. Like they can stand in front of an oncoming attacker. Like this can block, maybe a Goblin Guide on 2 or one of those 3/2s that there's 100 of now. That's what you get for 2 mana now. So it's like if it's just a 1-for-1 in the early game, but in the later game you're able to get the extra value off of it, maybe it makes the cut for that reason.
All right. Next up, Nelly.
Let's talk about Gleaming Gear Drake. Ooh, blue and a red for an artifact creature Drake. It's a 1/1 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, investigate. Sold. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Gleaming Gear Drake. Okay, yeah, I had someone in my chat call this the new... oh no, I've forgotten the name of the blue-black Death Touch
Baleful
flying.
Strix?
Baleful Strix, thank you. Played that card so many times, but there's too many magic
Baleful
cards.
Strix?
It's
I don't
not-
know. I wouldn't go that far.
It's
but
more like an
anyways,
alternate Sprite Dragon, right? Like
Sure.
Sprite Dragon has haste. This one comes with a clue. They both like getting bigger. So this deck or this card is kind of tailor-made for a certain deck that's going to be jamming a bunch of treasure tokens, or as a piece in eggs. I could see you maybe if you need one more win con, like it does just like get infinitely large if you're looping your Black Lotus or whatever. I don't immediately have a home for it, but if you're some sort of mid-range academy or BattleBots deck, I could see it.
Wheeler and I are both sitting here just ready
Go
to...
for it. Go for it.
Yeah,
Talk about the Gear Drake.
No,
Serge.
you you covered what I had at the end, I
Okay,
think.
sure.
So it's funny because last episode we were talking about that 3-mana 1/3 goblin that every time you sacrifice an artifact you put a +1/+1 counter on it. We're like, I don't like this even though it makes mana.
Right.
This one I like a lot, and there's an archetype that Wheeler and I have been brewing for a while. Wheeler's been more successful than I have, called Arista Scraps,
Right.
which is a goblin welder style deck where artifacts are changing positions all the time, and this gets out of hand very quickly, specifically because, well, for a lot of reasons. One, it's an artifact itself. 2, it comes with an artifact to sacrifice with a clue token. And 3, it flies. And this is going to kill people. This is just such a great role player in that sort of deck. And as we were talking about before with the Sharp-Eyed Rookie, it doesn't even need to get that big to start being really threatening and to really start clocking your opponent. So I like this a lot, very specifically in that deck. I don't think I'd play it in BattleBots. Maybe I would, actually, now that I think about it. It's pretty good in that too, yeah.
It just makes 2. It's a single card that makes 2 artifacts
Yeah.
that replaces itself, synergizes with your other cards.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God forbid you face this card with Arcbound Ravager, because you are taking 20. Yeah. I have like the Jeskai, the blue-white artifact mid-range deck. I have the Jeskai version of this in mind, or Jeskai Welder in mind, less so than, or more so than like the engine of Arista Scraps, of like, Disciple of the Vaulting my opponent into the dirt. Although that's still quite good with this card. But yeah, the floor for this card, it's funny because there's so much to say about this card, but at the same time, it's a 2-mana 1/1 flyer that's an artifact that makes another artifact that replaces itself
Yep.
and gets bigger. It's
Yep.
Rune Wing, but playable.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely think it's playable. Maybe 2024 is the year I'm going to build Grixis Welder and then really know what I'm doing
Sick.
with cards like this.
All right, next up we have Insidious Roots. This is a 2-mana enchantment for a black and a green. Creature tokens you control have tapped to add 1 mana of any color. Whenever 1 or more creature cards leaves your graveyard, create a 0/1 green plant creature token, then put a +1/+1 counter on each plant that you control. This is just a dredge card, isn't it?
This is a dredge card. It is so easy to get creatures leaving your graveyard in dredge multiple times in a single turn. And every single time you do that, you get to do a little mini Avenger of Zendikar triggered ability. Like, these plants are going to get out of hand very quickly. They're going to help you take so many game actions. God forbid you have anger in your graveyard, because then you just have a bunch of hasty plants. They let you cast Hogak because they're green. Yeah, this card is real deal. You cast it off Luris, which is pretty important because There are so many lines in that deck where you end up milling Lurrus, and then you reanimate Lurrus, and then you reanimate, and then you like bring back Underworld Breach or bring back this card, start popping off. Yeah, card's great.
I am a little bit curious to try this maybe in a recurring Nightmare deck. We'll see. It's just because the 0/1 is a creature that you can then sacrifice to recurring Nightmare, so you don't have to necessarily worry. Because like some loops are bad, you want to keep both things you have.
Yeah.
That gives you a little bit of fodder there, but it might be a bit expensive for that. But I'll keep this in mind next time I'm brewing that deck.
I just want to say, like, more cool dredge lines. You could have a bridge from below with a few tokens, and then this thing out, and now suddenly you're just casting your reanimator target from your hand.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, exciting stuff.
All right, next up, Wheeler.
Kaya, Spirit's Justice. 2 white and a black for a 3 loyalty legendary planeswalker Kaya. Whenever one or more creatures you control and or creatures in your graveyard are put into exile, you may choose target creature card from among them. Until end of turn, target token you control becomes a copy of it, except it has flying. +2, surveil 2, then exile a card from a graveyard. +1, make a 1/1 spirit creature token with flying. -2, exile target creature you control. For each other player, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls. This is a 4-mana planeswalker. It has a +1 that makes a blocker, and it's unplayable. There's just, have some more respect for yourself and your deck. You can play so many other cards in this card's spot. You could play a better Kaya in this card.
2 better Kayas.
I'd even say you could play 3 better Kayas. Yeah, it's not great, but it is a planeswalker, and that's why we brought it up. Yeah, it's just too narrow.
Card looks super fun. Play it in Commander. Kellen, Inquisitive Prodigy. 2 green black for a 3/4 legendary human fairy detective with flying and vigilance. Whenever Kellen, Inquisitive Prodigy attacks, destroy up to 1 target artifact. If you controlled that permanent, draw a card. That's super exciting, and we haven't seen a ton of that 2/3 that blows up an enchantment or an artifact from Dissension around anymore. But
Trigon
back
Predator.
in my day, Trigon Predator used to
was
be
a menace.
super relevant.
It was the only thing keeping the Tinker decks in.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Honestly, so we not having seen that for a while, I'm like, oh, it's like a Trigon Predator. Anyways, it also has an adventure called Tail the Suspect. Green blue for a sorcery. Investigate. You may play an additional land this turn. Okay, so
If I may just very quickly,
yeah.
you did say 2 green and a black.
I'm
It's a
sorry.
blue. And that's
I'm
fine.
sorry.
Just a minor correction for the people who might be listening.
So yeah, green blue, 4-mana, 3/4 flying vigilance with a green blue sorcery adventure. So yeah, I think you can probably try to sneak this into any deck that you're already running Growth Spiral. Like, it's not quite as good as Growth Spiral at doing what it is, but since the floor is Growth Spiral and then later you have to pay the extra 2 mana to draw the card, like, what Growth Spiral is doing that you're most excited about in any deck with Growth Spiral is getting more lands onto the field, and it does do that. So it's not an instant, but it does have this whole 4-mana 3/4 flying vigilance that can, like, blow up your opponent's stuff as an upside instead of drawing the card right away. I think for that reason, definitely if you're jamming Explorers in your, like, I might actually give this a spin in the Teamer Escape Shift deck.
Curb.
Yeah.
You like it in Curb too?
If you're jamming in Curb. Yeah, probably. Like, if you have Explorer in your deck and blue mana, I think you should probably at least try this. I think it's that good. I think it's good enough that we should try it. I might end up saying in a few weeks or whatever after having tried it that, like, nope, this doesn't do it. You got to draw the card first. That's all that matters. I'm not willing to pay the 2 mana for the Investigate later, or the fact that it's a sorcery. I don't want a second sorcery Explorer, but, like, yeah, I think probably it's going to stick around a Curb.
Cool.
Yep.
Next up, we have the Crawl Whip Cracker. This is a 2-mana 3/2 Insect Assassin for a black and a green. It has reach, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target token an opponent controls. All right, right off the bat, we have a 2-mana 3/2 that has a keyword ability, which is great. And I know what you're probably thinking. You're like, oh, we got treasure tokens, we got clue tokens, we got food tokens. You know, this is going to hit a lot of the time. And I would like to remind you of a very particular card that sees a lot of play in our format, Urza's Saga, or Urza. Just something that kills these Karnstruct tokens that are quickly getting out of hand and that you are seeing all of the time. Also, the stupid 2/2 Goblin token off of Fable of the Mirror Breaker. There are some very high value ones, and I think this card is going to have a hit oftentimes, and even if it doesn't, you've got a 2-mana 3/2 with the keyword ability on it. I don't think this is going to see play in a lot of decks. I think specifically just something like Green Mold, like a very low to the ground, aggressive green and black deck. Maybe, like, I don't think the Rock is playing this, but maybe if you're trying to be pretty aggressive in those colors, you're going to be happy to play this. It's going to be pretty live when you play this, and even if it isn't, you got a 2-mana 3/2.
Yeah.
It's wild how not that great this is against Minsk and Boo, but yeah, I think if you draw this once every round over the course of a 4-round tournament and you didn't like blow something up at least twice, I'm very surprised by your metagame.
I mean, at least it stops you from taking 7 the next turn.
Yeah, like
or like a play pattern of Minsk and Boo is just like make this 4/4 go. Right?
Yeah.
Protect your planeswalker.
Right, so you might get to kill the Minsk and Boo if they're on that, and you have another creature. It obviously, like what Serge said, 3 power, 2 mana, reach. Yeah.
All right, next up, Wheeler.
Lazov, Wearer of Faces, blue and a black for a 2/3 shapeshifter detective. It's a legendary creature. Whenever Lazov attacks, exile target card from a graveyard and then investigate. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, you may have Lazov become the copy of a creature card exiled with it until end of turn. This is kind of an interesting card. 2-mana 2/3 body in blue-black is like not the end of the world defensively. Like it sticks on the board and it's kind of annoying. It lets it attack reasonably well. Exiling any card is pretty nice. And then getting to draw cards off the exile, also not that bad. Being able to, say, exile an opponent's I don't know, if you like hand attack an opponent's evasive creature to let Lazov get through, or God forbid they're on a deck that actually has reanimation targets, or they've just swamp cycled Troll of Kaza Doom, then they're probably taking a quadrillion damage off this. You could also be the one to manipulate what it's exiling, like with Phyrexian Dreadnought, or some of the others, like exiling somebody's Uro is kind of exciting, is that you get to exile their Uro, crack a clue, make it an Uro attack, and then get to do all the stuff, or Croxa or whatever. It's hard to find a home for this if you are like trying to put together like a Stifle Knot deck, and you're just really just looking for as many redundant pieces to achieve that. Then this is something that can show up because it's in those colors and you have this ability. But it's kind of in that Alquist Proft scenario where it's like, I like what this does. If you draw it late, it's just going to start drawing you an extra card every attack and eating their graveyard, but I don't want to include it in my deck. I want to like draw it on turn 10 and be like, I didn't include this in my deck. And then like the spirit of my grandparents is like, we believe in you. We've put this in there for you. And you're like, wow,
Like,
thanks.
this is my grandfather's laugh.
Yeah, exactly.
Incredible. I think this could be fine in a regular Reanimator deck where it's like in the early game, obviously the utility of exiling your opponent's stuff is there, or just being like a 2/3 roadblock, trade with their 3/2 if it's attacking, keep you alive until you can cast a reanimation spell, and have that flexibility that like, yeah, okay, I'm only drawing 7 cards like this one turn or something maybe, but I can like exile my own Gristlebrand and then hit the button and go off from there.
I don't, call me a coward, I don't love exiling my own threats on my side if I'm a Reanimator deck or a Stifle Knot deck.
Coward.
Because then
You're a coward.
Because then they crack us bounce this.
Even James.
Thanks, James. Well, because they crack us bounce this, and then all of a sudden you've got nothing.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so I like it a little bit more proactively, but you're not wrong.
Cowboy magic, make them have it.
Yeah,
you know?
I just I fear. Shall I move on, Nelly?
Please, let's talk about No More Lies. White, blue, instant. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3 generic mana. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. Hey, we did it. We got back up to the power level of Magic where they're just like, mana leak is okay. It's fine. Let the kids have Mana Leak. Let them eat Mana Leak.
Yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, everything's too broken. There needs to be some counterplay. So instead of Mana Leak, you get to exile their card, but you have to pay a white mana. So only the blue-white control decks get Mana Leak. No blue-red control or blue-black control decks, right? I don't know. What is there to say about this card? You're going to be seeing it for decades. As long as you play Canadian Highlander, if your opponent has counter magic and blue and white mana in their deck, this might be there.
You're never going to believe what the best deck in this format is and has been for a decade.
Yeah, exactly.
So I miss Jeremy White exactly at this moment for the classic bit we used to make him do of ranking all the counter spells. Where does this
classic.
rank in all of the counter spells now, right? Is it above or below Dovin's Veto?
Above Dovin's Veto.
Above Dovin's Veto.
He hits creatures.
Is it above or below classic Mana Leak?
It's below Mana Leak.
Yeah.
But cost of inclusion, right?
Yeah.
It's a more powerful card, but it's worse because it's in fewer decks. Okay.
I don't want to go on a tangent about how I think that tier lists are just kind of nothing.
Clickbait?
But it's just really hard to continue because this card is again, it's a Mana Leak, but it's also different from Mana Leak in that where it shows up, but also what it synergizes with. Being able to pitch this to Solitude is pretty huge.
Yeah.
That might change the numbers on certain Jeskai decks that are like Jeskai green decks that are primarily blue-red that are going to play this and now can go back to playing Solitude because they can, play this and maybe one more white card and we're here. Exiling it is huge because it plays into a kind of that remand-ish play pattern of you're just No More Lies, your combo piece. And they're oh, okay, I'm screwed.
Guess I'm dead.
I can't pay for, sometimes it's cast Black Lotus and you're counter that. And then they're going to just Yogg Will anyways.
Yeah,
sure.
But the downside of needing to pay white mana, lol, is really well counteracted by the upside of sometimes completely annihilating their game plan with exile.
And some may argue that forcing you to play white with this card is a good thing because then you'll say, "Hey, I shouldn't be playing Rug. I should just be playing Jeskai like the rest of us."
Like my grandfather's deck. All right.
So.
Now, next up, we've got Trostani, 3 Whispers. This is a 3-mana 4/4 legendary Dryad for a green mana, a Selesnya hybrid mana, and then a white mana. It has 3 activated abilities. 1 in a green, target creature gains Death Touch until end of turn. A Selesnya mana, target creature gains Vigilance until end of turn. And then 2 in a white, target creature gains Double Strike until end of turn. This is, at its worst, a 3-mana 4/4 vanilla creature with legendary. And then it has a bunch of activated abilities on it, which makes combat math going forward an absolute nightmare. I think if you want to include this deck, you're probably in exactly one deck, which is like a Selesnya. Your creatures are higher power and toughness than your mana cost, like watchwolf.deck. Otherwise, it's weird. I don't think this card is tremendously exciting because it doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield, and it's pretty mana hungry. But then again, if you have a bunch of excess resources and you get to untap with this, suddenly get to attack, your opponent is going to have a very bad day. I'm just picturing you've got extra mana and any creature with trample, and then you get to give a trample creature Death Touch and Double Strike, and then you're just off to the races on that.
It does something, but it only does something on turn 6 when it ETBs, right? If you play this on turn 2 or turn 3, then you are still kind of ahead of the curve as far as bodies go. And then if you draw this and can activate it in the same turn, then it says when this ETBs, you win combat this turn.
Yeah, and every turn going forward probably
Yeah,
as well.
and then if you just draw this, if you're both top decking and you draw this card and they can't deal with it, you are going to win that game. Because Double Strike Death Touch is yowza.
Kind of unfair.
It's weird that it's so much less fun than a Shoot, I can't remember any card names
Loxodon
today.
Smiter.
No, this one.
Oh, the elbow drop.
Oh, Savage Knuckleblade.
Savage Knuckleblade. Like it doesn't give itself haste,
Yeah.
so it's not as exciting as a Savage Knuckleblade, and like it doesn't deal as much damage as a Savage Knuckleblade.
Well, in some ways, it kind of does.
Oh right, yeah, I guess you're right. It can, yeah, but it doesn't evade removal like a Savage Knuckleblade, but it's just kind of more relevant. Like these abilities win the game.
Yeah. And you can cast off Avacyn's Pilgrim and Delighted Halfling,
Yeah.
which you can't do with Savage Knuckleblade.
Yeah, yeah. So I tend to agree. I think include it in your Steel Leaf Paladin Selesnya Little Kid deck, and then
Steel Leaf Paladin.
isn't that right? No,
Green,
that's the wrong one.
green.
Green, 5/4, right? Like because it's not even the biggest.
No, Steel
3-drop.
Leaf Paladin's like a 6-drop from Plane Shift.
Champion.
You're
Steel
thinking of
Leaf
Steel Leaf
Champion.
Champion.
Steel Leaf
yeah.
Champions.
Yeah.
Include it in your
knew
Steel Leaf Champion deck.
I got Nelly. That's fine.
It's okay. I really can't remember any card names, but I've been saying the wrong stuff long enough that Serge knows what I mean. Sorry.
I speak Nelly. It's all good.
It's a good one.
All right, Wheeler.
On to naming the card properly. It's Unruly Krasis, a card from the Clue product that's coming out with this set. 1 green and a blue for a 4/4 trample, Shark Octopus Lizard.
Incredible.
Whenever Unruly Krasis attacks, you may have the base power toughness of another target creature you control become XX until end of turn, where X is Unruly Krasis' power. And then for some reason, they gave this Adapt 3 for 3 green and a blue. Reminder, Adapt 3 means if this creature has no +1/+1 counters on it, put N +1/+1 counters on it. This is a 3-mana 4/4 trampler that turns your mana dorks into 4/4s. I'm going to be playing this in the Bant counters deck or the Rug counters deck, or maybe just, I don't know, maybe even Bant Blade. Like if we're making a return
That's
to
trample.
Kata Blade, Bant Blade kind of stuff, like it has trample. And the play pattern of Elf on 1, this on 2, attack you for 8 turn 3,
Then cast a sword or
And then-
whatever.
yeah.
With your
Armageddon,
mana,
yeah.
do something
Yeah,
else. Oh, yeah.
like-
Armageddon, sure.
Yeah, this is a card where the floor is it's very good as far as being above rate, and then the play patterns with this card are scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good Lord. All right, Nelly, you're up.
Let's talk about War Leader's Call, another exciting one. 1 red-white for an enchantment that says creatures you control get +1/+1, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, War Leader's Call deals 1 damage to each opponent. So literally Glorious Anthem and Impact Tremors stapled to the same card for a mana cost that includes both of their mana costs, kind of, but isn't more mana. So hey, if you have red and white mana in your deck and you like Glorious Anthem or Impact Tremors, play this.
Tokens, baby.
Yeah.
I'm just picturing this with Assemble the Legion. Ugh. I don't know.
I'm ready to
That's-
lose that Commander game.
Nice.
That's fair.
Mardu Tokens won a Monday night this year. In
Nice.
fact, the Mardu player that had bust out that list, it's qualified for the top 8.
Sick.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's real.
Were they playing an Impact Tremors, though? Or were they just going wide?
Well, they weren't playing Impact Tremors, and I don't know if they were playing an Anthem, but this circumvents that issue by
Sure.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
if you have no anthems in your creature tokens deck, you probably owe it to yourself to try this one.
But God, don't you? I mean, just because you don't have them doesn't mean you haven't wanted to include
Yeah,
them.
that's
Right.
fair.
It's just a
That's
little
very
awkward,
fair.
but like
Everybody's
Yeah.
looked at Perforos and thought to themselves, maybe one day. Maybe.
maybe.
Yeah. Very exciting, very powerful card.
Awesome. All right, let's then move on to the artifacts. And I'm actually just going to throw this right back to Wheeler.
There's just one. It's from the Commander product, and it's called Ransom Note. 1 mana artifact. It's a clue. When Ransom Note enters the battlefield, you surveil 1 and pay 2. Generic. Sacrifice Ransom Note. Choose 1. Cloak the top card of your library. Goad target creature and draw a card. So for those that don't remember what Cloak is Manifest, but with Ward 2. That's it. This is an egg. It's a pretty good egg. The fact that it's an egg that does something right off the bat that sculpts your next draw or fills your graveyard, 2 things that eggs wants to do in the first place, is pretty cool and good. Secondly, it lets you just cloaking the top card of your library turns this egg into like, Well, mid-combat, here's a 2/2 with Ward 2 that can now chump block or just eat your thing or just make attacking me really bad for you. But also, if I'm generating infinite mana, this lets you say, like, okay, I'm going to cloak all these cards, like these creatures, and then maybe time sieve your way into an extra turn and just kill them. Or you just cloak like 5 times in like a, not a I'm killing you second sunrise, but a like I'm going to draw 5 cards, ramp 3 lands, and present a board that you now need to deal with second sunrise. So yeah, this is a good egg.
Sounds like it adds a lot of utility to the egg situations. The sort of, the second sunrise turns and the open the vaults turns or whatever, like where maybe you're not infinite, but you've got a bunch of options and you get to play Magic.
Yeah.
And like it's giving you new and cool things to do with your eggs.
Not to mention, cloaking the top card in eggs is also just very similar to surveilling further, like just putting a bunch of things in play that will die to either your opponent's creatures naturally, which puts more things into your graveyard, which makes bringing them back a lot easier. And then Goad can even show up occasionally. People always skip out on the arena when they're going through the initiative, but it pops up. It pops up.
It can happen. Sometimes you just need their creature to be tapped on your turn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good egg.
And the final thing we're going to talk about today is the new cycle of surveil duels. Do we have the name of one? We didn't actually... Oh, there we go. The Commercial District is a great example. So all of these lands have both of the basic mana types. They tap for both of the basic mana types. They all enter the battlefield tapped. And when they enter the battlefield, surveil 1. Are these lands good? Yeah, they're okay. They are perfectly reasonable to include in your deck. For example, I would probably include a couple of the mountains in Scapeshift as a way to get the mountain count up higher. The play pattern of end of turn fetching for this to surveil is pretty gas. And for a couple of the specific colors that don't necessarily have the same density of fetchable duels, seems a great way to flesh out your mana base. I think at this point, if you are still playing temples, you could probably happily upgrade every single temple in all of your decks to these, and you'd be... I personally think Surveil is better than Scry. That's my thought. Anything else to add?
I disagree with these cards being playable.
You don't think they're playable?
I think in very specific cases, you will play the individual lands.
I'm going to play this one in Scapeshift.
Yes. I think this one can show up in Scapeshift, or the blue-red one as well, if you're in Rug.
Yeah.
So the mountains get an added bonus. The blue-black one gets an added bonus if you're in something like Reanimator, especially with World Gorger Dragon, because it gives you a fetchable duel that you can loop with World Gorger Dragon, which is pretty huge. But the cost of inclusion of a land that comes into play tapped like this, like if you're playing a Thoracle deck with Tainted Pact and Demonic Consultation, and you need to have one, like a true singleton deck, then including the blue-black one is fine. You would have to pay me to play the green-white one.
Oh, no, absolutely no. A bunch of colors are completely unplayable.
Yeah, and then general, like these are spots where give it a shot, but I wouldn't be too surprised if like you tried this out in Thoracle and we're like, oh, no, I'm good.
Yeah,
I'll just play Fetid Pools instead.
Or any of the Triomes. I think the Triomes are overall better than this, especially if it's a very loose 3-color splash or just the flexibility that the Triomes offer.
Yeah, if you're a deck that has white in, like if you're a white deck and you have Prismatic Ending in your list, like maybe you want to play a Triome instead of one of the white X versions of this land, because then it'll give you more colored mana to Prismatic Ending, etc.
Yeah, like splashing for a Zagoth Triome because you have Deathrite or something.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm racking my brain to think of when else I would play any of the ones that add black or white. It's like those two, because like, you know, the Boros decks, the Selesnya decks, the Azorius decks, the Rakdos decks, like probably not.
This format,
just a reality of the format.
Yeah, the format is so fast that it's very risky to play tapped duels, even if they're fetchable end step. And I think the only exclusion to that is maybe creature lands and very specific decks, and that's because they provide more utility than just color fixing or surveil.
Yeah.
But I think they're not bad.
Yeah, there's some utility lands you include for sure. Yeah.
Let's move on to our closing segment here, which I like to call the final thoughts in Murders at Karlov Manor. Wheeler, would you like to go first?
Yeah, this is a continued trend of powering down sets, at least for our format, which is good. I don't like that. I mean, sorry, which is good, but it's also emblematic of another trend that is not MKM's fault, but it's like, okay, we have like a couple of cards here. That's pretty neat. Why do we only have a couple of cards here? Oh, Modern Horizons 3 is coming out later this year, and that's going to be like dumping a truckload of dirt.
Ready for the first 4-part episode?
God, I hope not. But yeah, like it's wild that like the best card in this set is just like unbelievably powerful, like No More Lies. Like, the best card in the set is something I didn't think we would ever get.
I kind of thought they were done printing those in standard sets.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could have seen No More Lies coming from Modern Horizons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Or like a Lord of the Rings or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There's some interesting cards in here, right? I like Archdruid's Charm as another kind of powerful but interesting card to play with. Yeah, keep up this trend is what I would say if they are designing specifically for us, which they're not, but, fingers crossed.
Solid set. A few cards that we like. I can't wait to play Reenact the Crime. And I otherwise just agree with Wheeler. It's great to see lots of commons and uncommons and regular rares and mythic rares that we'll never consider for the format. Not pushing the power creep on the game in general, like to the max as fast as possible is fantastic.
It's always interesting in very synergy-heavy sets when a mechanic is very powerful within the confines of like a limited environment or maybe even a standard environment, but that mechanic is just too limited to come outside. The example is like whenever you undisguise a creature or something like that, right? I think there's maybe one disguised creature that we're going to be playing, which is funny. This is a classic joke of, the morph creature, it's Willbender.
Right.
It's almost always going to be the 2-mana 3/2 Loxodon, which
Gatekeeper, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're like, great, cool gatekeeper you have there because everyone's going to know what that is. And that immediately strikes a lot of the cards out. I mean, a similar example would be Energy after Kaladesh, right? You're like, wow, this is such a cool mechanic. It'd be great to do something from this, but the card pool is just this big. And so you'll never really be able to do something further than that. But no, I like the set a lot. I like Highlander a lot. I don't think this is a great Highlander set.
Yeah.
Anything else to add? Any closing remarks, my friends? Awesome. Then with that, we'll say thank you so much for listening to our set review for Murders at Karlov Manor. I've been Serge, joined by Nelly.
I was here.
Wheeler.
Hi.
Huge shout out to James on Tech, who said only one thing today, and that was to make fun of me. Of course, thank you to our editors for making this possible. And thank you to you with all your support over the Patreon, over at patreon.com/linearityRun. We literally could not do this without you. As always, if you think we missed any cards, if you've got things, questions, what you're excited about, let us know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
He called you a coward, Serge. It wasn't fun.